Hi, good afternoon everybody, and a very warm welcome to the SME Club by Pro Manchester and very proudly sponsored by us at Virgin Money. For those of you who I haven't met before, my name's Ruby James and I'd usually be running all these events in my Virgin Money Market Street store in Manchester. But as we all continue to work from home, it's still great to connect with you through these virtual events online. At Virgin Money, our priority is providing support through the crisis for our customers, and all the support that we offer can be found on our website, and we'll make sure that that's circulated to you following the event. And we'd love to hear what you think of today's discussion, so do tag us in any of your social posts. We're at Virgin Money on all social platforms. And today's discussion, we're talking to Mike Blackburn, and I'll hand over to Chris to kick things off. I hope you enjoy the event.
Many thanks, Ruby. Thanks again for your support and sponsorship from Virgin Money for our Knowledge Exchange webinar series that we're doing. It's been a few weeks actually, so I think it's since I last hosted one, so it's good to be back in the seat, and I'm even more excited and happy that Mike is kindly joining us today to have a conversation and to share some of his knowledge and thoughts on what's happening at the moment, what's happened with COVID-19 in the city, what things we're looking out for in the future. Now, Mike really does not need any introduction from me. I think most of you know his background and some of the work he does. The number of trustee roles and non-exec roles that Mike holds are varied and vast. And so the expertise that Mike brings is amazing. I'm really pleased. So, Mike, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it.
That's great. Good to see you again, Chris. How are you doing?
I'm very well. I'm very well. And
you're not sweltering in this heat, are you?
no, not today, hopefully. One of the things we were talking about before we actually joined our call is we were just chatting briefly about the weather that's coming over to Manchester today. And I'm up in Bolton, and Mike, you're down Cheshire, towards Cheshire way, aren't you, in Cheshire?
Yeah.
So you've got a slightly advantage point watching the storm slowly moving in from the west. So do let us know if the thunder and lightning starts, so the rest of us are well aware of it, if that's okay.
It's definitely getting closer. The sky about literally 15 minutes ago was beautiful and blue, and now it's getting cloudy. I can see it coming over from Wales.
Right.
So
well,
give it an hour and it'll get dark.
Fabulous. We like to provide a multiple of services through this webinar, including weather reports. So you get very good value for money when you join us. So as I said, today we're going to have a little bit of a chat with Mike about his thoughts around what we've been doing, what the city's been doing, how the city's been coping with COVID-19 and some of the trends that we've seen. And again, as always, please ask your questions to us. We want you as an audience for taking part. Please submit your questions through the Q&A function that we've got. Myself and the Pro Manchester team will pick those up and we will ask them. Please don't be shy. And if there's anything that we can't answer today, we will get back to you and try and get an answer for you if we can. So let's get cracking, Mike, if that's okay. So let's dive straight in. What, in terms of Manchester now, we've been through lockdown where Manchester city streets have been empty. There've been some fantastic photos of the city in the middle of the day being empty. Lockdown is now starting to ease. People are going back into offices slowly, admittedly, but they are. The city's starting to reactivate. What do you think Manchester's going to look and feel like once we start picking that up even further? Do you think there is going to be a change? Is there anything that you've seen during this period that is going to change how we do business or how Manchester operates?
So there's a lot in there, Chris, in a sense of companies and individuals over the first few months were just dealing with the crisis, and some are still dealing with the crisis. So getting access to finance, structuring their business, how they're doing the supply chains, a whole series of business issues that people were probably swamped with. And in my small business, we definitely swamped with that cancellation of contracts, money not coming into the bank, and then trying to get a grip with government advice. And I've got to say that the Manchester business community and the organisations around that, Pro Manchester, the Chambers of Commerce, the FSB, the business support groups, I think only did things brilliantly individually, but in typical Mancunian fashion, they came together as well to share arts, and that's not stopping. So, and I think that's just traditional Manchester of try and help others as much as you're helping yourselves. So that was just a kind of an amazing way of doing it. I think people then started to struggle with or try to overcome the challenge of suddenly having a large portion of your workforce not sitting in front of you, not sitting in those offices, working away. And yeah, I've been dealing with that and doing kind of what we used to call agile working for 20 years when I used to work in BT, where we had 75,000 people who didn't have a dedicated desk. I was one of those. So you have to deal with that in terms of your structures, your performance measurements, your IT, your security in a very different way. So as we move into, we're now moving in Manchester what we call the kind of phase 2, living. We did living with lockdown. We're now living with COVID for 12 months as we come out of the COVID lockdown, and then we'll go into build back better later on. And I think a couple of things are going to happen. So I've already heard a lot of large organisations saying they're doing huge investigations on whether they should even have premises at all at one extreme, right the way through to the other of bring everybody back. And I think it'll end up being a mix of both. So some organisations will bring a core number of people back in. There are certain functions that you might want to be in the same room. So if you're running the 999 services, or some call centres need to be relatively close proximity to each other, not all of them, but some of them. If I found it very difficult in my old days running a big sales campaign or big bid campaign to try and do that with 15, 20 people remotely connected. That was a tough gig, because you need to be sitting looking at sketches and drawings all the time. So for some things people will come back to the office, but for many others I think organisations will adopt an agile working process, but they need to give people the option, I think, rather than just assume that it's good for everybody. Making that assumption that it's good for everybody puts stress and pressure on people, because some people don't want to put their hand in the air and say, I'm sorry, but I live in a 1-bedroom flat and it's not relevant for me, and I've got a dog and a young baby, and for some people that's maybe potentially embarrassing, or they just don't want to open up, or they're a carer and they don't want to tell you, and others find it lonely working home. To be honest, Chris, I've struggled a bit in the last couple of months. I've had days when I felt really quite down, dealing with screens all the time, no relief from those screens. And my family have got used to me now finishing and then going away and sitting in a room for somewhere with a book for half an hour, just to kind of, it's almost, that's almost my my travel home, if you like, when I used to do it in the car or on the train. So I now do that at home deliberately, trying to make myself just relax for half an hour before I have to ask or answer my daughter's questions about when my driving lessons are going to start again, Dad. Now
you can say today, thankfully, the news has come through.
4th of July, she's delighted.
Oh.
Absolutely, and she can do it. So we shouldn't make assumptions about people's circumstances. So I think a lot of people need to start going through a process of evaluating their business in terms of how they could work, their governance arrangements, their structures, who physically needs to be where, how best to undertake activity, their supplier relationship. I think what will come out of it is more shared space. People renting a desk or drop-in desks in that kind of area. But the one final one is, in answer to the question, what I'd really like to see coming out of it in Manchester, I think Manchester will do this. I think I want the place to be kinder, more human focused, and that stuff that's been going on for the last couple of months of people putting an arm around each other, a virtual arm around each other, running errands for neighbours and friends and family, picking up the phone saying, how are you? Rather than just assuming you're all well. I think that kindness, I'd love that to stay as part of our way of doing business and way of running cities.
No, I think that's a really good one, actually, Mike, in terms of thinking of that kindness. I think we spoke a previous webinar. You brought back a memory when we were discussing how it's taken a global pandemic for us to know who our neighbours are. Like once upon a time, you always knew who your next door neighbour was. But then it's taken this for us to suddenly kind of, I need to know who my neighbour is and who lives downstairs from me, who lives upstairs from me, and the person over the road. It has changed. I think it has changed things quite a bit on that front. And similarly, I do hope that we're able to continue that and allow us to continue those relationships and that support network that's been created with families, communities, and so on. I think it's made a huge difference in terms of everyone pulling together trying to support one another. And I think it's interesting with that as well, just briefly going back on what you were talking about on workforce and people working in offices and so on, and particularly the mental health issues of working from home. I've certainly had experience previously, before lockdown, when I've worked from home, and I found it very difficult at times, exactly the way you described it, feeling very isolated. I found it very difficult at times, and mentally found it quite just difficult even to do work because of the loneliness aspect of it. And I found that because of the need for everyone to embrace technology, for things like Microsoft Teams, Zoom calls and so on, actually for me, working from home now is a very different experience to what it was before because of the use of technology. And I think that certainly is a positive. And like I said, it's not a panacea, it's not the silver bullet, everyone can work from home now. That's not the case. But I think it does mean that I think working from home is a very different experience potentially from what it was.
Very much so.
Technology.
Yeah. I was talking with another company this morning, Chris, and about that exact question about how they're doing things, and they're very well aware. This company is very well aware of the kind of human behaviour factor of using screens and being away from the office and feeling isolated. So they've now really thought clearly about how they run meetings online. So not just taking for granted that everybody knows how to run a meeting online. So how you chair a meeting, how you make sure everybody's got a voice, because in a room you can look around the room and you can, to some degree, you can recognize who's engaging and who's not engaging in the conversation. You could call on people if you know them well enough and that's appropriate to make a suggestion. Slightly harder when you can't see the body language and the people's engagement on screen. But they've made it a kind of standard part of their protocols. It's probably too big a word, but how they run their both big meetings and smaller meetings, by having the first few questions, the first few minutes is human. How are you feeling? How's things going, people? You know, what's happening? Did you see this last night? About the weather? You started off actually about the weather, because that's what you would do in a meeting when you're all physically meeting, as you're walking into a room, and we can't lose that human factor. And it's so easy to. I've been really guilty actually of not building enough time between meetings online. And so I've been going from one to the other with no time to digest what I've just done, to set the actions off in that 10-minute walk across Manchester. I don't have it anymore, so I've got to discipline myself to do that better, and I'm not as good as I should. I need to work on that one. Yeah,
no, that's actually a really interesting learn. Like
there is something else though.
Well, sorry, Mike, go on.
No. I was just going to say there is something about as we get into the kind of meeting technology and using of technology in future, we will all have to work out the kind of people and processes, how we change our processes for using and our governance arrangements for using technology. And the part for me that really stands out is the mental health aspect you're talking about. Is people could feel as though decisions are being made around them and to them and not including them. There are times when you're in the office, you bump into the boss and you get 30 seconds and you can say something fantastic, but you don't have that opportunity around. The Americans talk about the kind of 30 seconds around the cooler type thing or around the coffee machine or whatever, and you miss out on that. And as a leader, you have all your senses open when you're in an office because you can listen to people and see people and hear them. And we've got, as leaders, we've got to find ways of just doing that slightly differently. And I don't know what the answer is yet.
No,
I really don't.
I think
the other bit.
It's a really good point, Mike. Actually,
as we bring people back to the office,
sorry, Mike. I think we're having slight internet-y jiggery going on, which is always the way with the living with COVID world now. So we do talk over, which we apologise for everyone watching, but no, I completely agree with you on that, Mike. And actually, it's a really interesting point about leadership within businesses, particularly for younger members of businesses and teams and new entries, because it's something that I've talked about internally with Grayling, with our colleagues, about when do we go back to our office, what's it going to look like. And I've been, particularly now, I'll hold my hand up, I've been a little selfish, saying I actually really enjoy working from home. I like not having to have the commute in every morning and facing the traffic. I like the fact that I've got more time to do stuff at home, in terms of that 30 minutes break to give yourself some air. I can go in the garden and do a little bit of gardening, get some fresh air, and I'm at home at a really good time to be able to cook a proper dinner. So I've really enjoyed lockdown in terms of working from home. But actually, when it comes to your younger members of the team, younger members of staff, particularly those who have joined relatively recently, who have been forced into isolation because of lockdown, a lot of learning and understanding about how a business works, how a company operates, is lost, because there's a lot of learning from absorbing and being part of a team who sit together, who talk together. That little, as you sat opposite each other working on your computers, and you have a little moan about something and then say, oh, what's up? And you can quickly just share it. There's a lot of, and again, it's that human aspect of it. But actually, I think it's going to be important for us to return to offices in some ways, because we will lose that development and growth of younger members of teams and staff without that interaction. It's very easy for us, because I was speaking with someone just today, exactly the same, about working in law, that it's very easy for senior partners to have all everything they need at their hands, at their laptops, whilst they're working from home. But those junior team members whom learn more by watching and absorbing, it's a massive break for them, this, and it's going to be important that we are able to balance that work, the flexibility of working from home, but also the need to have that collaboration. And I think you mentioned it earlier, Mike, actually, that the need for people to come together, particularly around campaigns and projects, to bounce those ideas off, because that's something that we've looked at Grayling as well, is how can we bring together a creative team to talk about an issue using remote technology, when actually the best way to use, in the past, to do it would be everyone in a room, a big pot of coffee, big whiteboard, and throwing ideas around each other until we come up with an absolutely brilliant idea. So yeah, for me, certainly, I think it's going to be an interesting one to see what happens next. And technology has been fantastic, but like we've already mentioned, it doesn't take away, it doesn't add to, rather, that human experience that we all need at times.
So I think you completely agree, Chris. There's two things there for me to pick up on. One, you're right, the induction process of new joiners, whether you're young or not so young, needs to be thought through clearly. How do you give people a sense of, you can give them presentations online, you can talk them through on, people need to feel it. And you can walk into an office and you could feel it operates. When I talk about mood music in an office, you can hear it. But when you're doing it on a remote, that's really hard. If not, in some cases, just impossible to do so. So we're going to work hard at induction processes, but I think that face-to-face interaction is kind of crucial. I'm going to contradict myself slightly in a way, or not, just clarify a little bit.
Yeah.
So when we were doing campaigns, when we were doing emergency things like, something around the world just goes down and we need the brains on that particular piece of topic, responding to a service issue. At that point, we could contain or bring together the brains from around the world, literally in moments, contained in a room, and deal with that problem pretty quickly. But when we try to do that for major bids, where you're being slightly more creative and you need to write things down at the same time and you need to draw pictures, that was when we found it really hard, or the technology held us back slightly from being able to do it. So in some cases, there are places where you can use technology massively. And other places where we've just got to think how we use it, and that's my point about we need to think about people, processes, and technology in our businesses, and what this means to us. I do want to come back to one thing though. I think bringing people back into the office, I think as leaders we need to think quite clearly about that. Again, because we shouldn't assume that everybody wants to come back in. I spoke to somebody this morning. In fact, she tweeted about it. Sandy Lindsay from Tangerine was tweeting about this morning. She went into the office yesterday for the first time, and she freely admitted on Twitter she was nervous, anxious about going back into an office and meeting people again. So for a senior leader and a respected leader like Sandy to be saying she's feeling that way, brilliant. Hold my hands up to her for calling it out. So we shouldn't assume that it's people will have the confidence. So as part of the Manchester Recovery Plan, we have got some human psychologists, human behavioural psychologists looking at aspects of how will people react and respond to certain things going on in the city centre, or the return to pubs and clubs and office-based stuff as well.
Yeah,
I think it's really important.
No, absolutely. And also, we need to add to that, obviously, it's not just the returning into the office that people are going to be redoing, but it's that travel as well. That something that a lot of us have not done for a while, is that from door to door is going to be a massive shift in terms of where we're at, and particularly with public transport. It's going to be interesting to see, again, giving people the option. Do you want to be able to travel into work on public transport? Would it be better to stay at home to work because you feel more comfortable with it, and so on? Yeah. But actually, just if I can, Mike, we have had a question from from John. Thank you, John, for putting a question. Again, remind everyone, please put in your questions, or if you've got any comments, if you wanted to add to our discussion, please use the Q&A to add to it. But Mike, John's asked, do you think that the shift in focus from everyone commuting into the city centre may be a shot in the arm for the satellite town centres, such as Bolton, Rochdale, Wigan, etc.? Do you think that actually may be a benefit if people are looking now for a more closer location to be working from, rather than having to go into the city centre? Yes.
So do you know what? When in your very, I should have said this in your very first question. Brilliant question. Should I say the one thing that's happened? Cities have become greener. They become clean air quality, and for a city like Manchester, that's a massive difference. And we've been trying, 20 years when people used to talk about back to the old agile working things about how long's the working day. The commute for Manchester, for people in Manchester, is pretty stereotypical. It's between 7:30 and 9 o'clock in the morning, and between 4:30 and 6 in the evening. And we're one of the few cities in the UK that doesn't vary very much. So we're very traditional. I think John's question goes to the heart of it, actually. And so having been trying to get businesses to think about flexi time or varying their start time, have flexible working patterns, so a working dad can take the kids to school, the kids to the dentist or whatever in the morning and then go into work. I've been trying for years to get people to adopt those more, and it gives a real opportunity for people to be thinking, should I be going in at all? Could I use Rochdale? Could I use Stockport? What do those town centres now offer? Because it could be cheaper, it could be quicker, it could be closer. When I gave up my work in BT, I stopped using my car. I started going on the train and only going in 2 or 3 days a week. And I could choose which ones I wanted to go into, but I made that choice. And I think if businesses, to John's point, could really now start thinking about the working day. What is the working pattern? It's the thing I used to talk about in BT is work is something you do, not a place you go to. Mm-hmm. So how do you think about the structure of the work, and if it can be done at home, can be done in a cafe, can be done somewhere else without having to come into an office. Why do you have to force people to come into an office to do so every day of the week? Yeah. And it will. I think it will give the places like Rochdale, Bury, Bolton, Oldham, Tameside more confidence that if they can put together an accommodation offer for flexible drop-in spaces or whatever, and I know there are some already, that might just encourage more people to say, I'll come in there and use it tomorrow, and I won't go into Manchester. Or, do you know what, I'll go and use it for a couple of hours while the rush hour dies down, and I'll jump on a tram at 10 o'clock and come in. So I've done 2 hours of work already, or an hour of work already, whatever. And I can still finish at 4 o'clock to pick the kids up, or finish at 6 if I want to. I think it gives everybody a lot of time to do it, to think more flexibly about how they work. Yeah, it's a great question.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you again for that question. Let's have some more if we can from anyone who's watching. But no, honestly, Mike, I completely agree with you. I think pre-COVID, there was a lot of talk about flexible working, and lots of people would say how they support flexible working, and oh, if you ask, we will do what we can to support you, and so on and so forth. But a bit like we said earlier about people being nervous about putting their hands up to say, can I, or could we do this? One of the lessons I think we have learned from lockdown is that you can work flexibly, and particularly that example of what the working day is going to look like now is completely different, I think, to what it was only 3-4 months ago. The idea that actually now I can start work in the morning at home, spend a few hours doing my emails, and then I can travel in a reasonable time because the traffic's down, there's less people on the trams and so on. Then I can do my work in a location in a city centre or a town centre with colleagues when we need to meet to discuss a project we're working on. We need to have some ideas shared and working on, and then I'm able to travel again home and then continue working until the work is done at the end of the day. And I think there is a greater understanding and acknowledgement that you can do this, and it does work. And I think I hope one of the things for me is that there is a greater trust between employer and employee about getting the work done. I think I certainly have worked in the past for employers whom the idea of working from home is you're having a day off and not actually working. And there's absolutely zero trust that you would work from home. I'd like to reiterate now that Grayling is certainly not one of those places. They are very good and very flexible, because I know my boss is watching. Hi. She'll cheer about that. Thanks, Kat. But yeah, I think that's going to be such an important aspect of that. Often, like going back to what you said, Mike, about you need to engage with your staff. You need to give them the options of what's going to be best for them. Because if you've got a happy staff, if your staff are happy and they see how much you are supporting them to be able to do their work, again, I think you actually have a better workforce who want to stay working for you and want to progress with you. And it's such an important thing. And I think particularly now, given the economic troubles that are going to be ahead, I think we can't really avoid it. We know it's going to be difficult economically. If you can support your staff and be able to provide them with a working environment that they are safe, happy and enjoy as well, I think it's going to be really important taking that forward.
There's a load of things in there, Chris, and I completely agree with you. So getting the employees engaged in, first of all, a description of what the work looks like, what's the outputs you're looking for, the outcomes you're looking for from what they do. And are there options about where you could do it rather than just imposing on people is going to be really important. So that is crucial. I'll tell you, I won't tell you who the company is. I remember doing it 15 years ago. A company called us in to do a study for them as to why their flexible working patterns weren't working very well. Nobody's adopting it. So I said to him, "Go on, explain to me then what your process is." So he said, "Yeah, we'll have you first, and we'll give them the laptop and a desk and some chairs in there, and we'll do it." I said, "Hang on a minute." I said, "Just tell me, what do you mean a camera?" "Oh, we're going to put a camera in the corner in their room so we can see them to make sure they're doing their work." Well, hang on a minute. No wonder your flexible working project's not working if you don't trust your staff.
Yeah.
And so I think that trust element. I mean, if you look at your people, anybody who works for you or with you in an office, how do you know what they're doing anyway behind a screen? No idea. So why would you trust them less just because they're out of sight? But that's my point earlier on about changing your governance arrangements, how you put objectives on people. So it's about getting the job done in a timely fashion, in a quality way, not necessarily about you must do it between the hours of 9 and 5. If there's deadlines to meet, that's different. You've still got to meet your deadlines, but it's got to have some trust in there. And if we don't get that both back with our existing staff who are furloughed and implement it from a flexible working, it'll just be a disaster in a sense. One other thing, Chris, if people are working at home, you as a director, you as an employer still have health and safety responsibility for people who are working at home. And that can't be forgotten about. That needs investigation. If they're just doing it ad hoc for a couple of hours, I think somebody have to check me from a lawyer on this. If you're doing a couple of hours, I think you're okay. But if you're ostensibly, as I was, an agile worker, I had to declare that I would validate my own house as being health and safety free, no tripwires, all that kind of stuff, because you're still responsible for their safety, even if they're working from home, because you've authorized it basically. That would just need checking out by people with some advice from their legal departments about how to do that.
No, really good point there, Mike. We've started getting a few more questions and comments coming through, so I'm going to jump onto one of those. And actually, it's a nice segue from what you were saying, Mike, about companies looking at how they operate, the governance structure and so on. Dominic's sent us a message asking, how do you think COVID will affect companies' corporate social responsibility?
That sounds like a Dominic Tinner question.
It is a Dominic Tinner question.
Seashell. Oh, well done, Dominic. Back to my point about being kinder. Yeah. So, and you mentioned it, Chris, as in your one of your second or third question about the community impact that people have been having over the last 12, 15 weeks has been phenomenal. The ability to reach out, help each other, help other people has been phenomenal. And so two things I always wanted to catch up on is how do we continue with the tech activity within companies, but also how do we ensure that community-led, that being kinder is embedded in our company structures and organizations, how we do things. If we don't, we'll have a massive missed opportunity. So this is where things like that happening in Manchester, like some of those things we're planning in Manchester about how do we ensure that this is not a lost generation of youth, of a kind of COVID generation, even though it's only a few months. For some people, this has been devastating around their GCSEs or A levels or university or their first job. We're seeing youth unemployment climbing massively in Manchester. Businesses can help in those areas by either mentoring or by giving support services. And I know both Sam Booth at Pro Manchester and the Chambers and other business organisations have been on calls with the Mayor's team to look at how business can help and shape that. But also I've always worked the principle that, in a mental model I have called create 10% headroom. And I used to give all the people who used to work for me 10% of the paid time to go and do something that they really wanted to do. And if it was around helping being a carer or helping the local cricket team or the local netball team or wherever it happened to be, they could go and do it. And that kind of became known as CSR in a sense, of people being able to do it. But I tell you what, my staff retention rates went up, my satisfaction index went up, because and I don't think people worked any less hard. They worked fewer hours, but were much more productive in what they did. So if we don't have an opportunity to engage with our community in a meaningful way, I'm sure a lot of businesses have changed their supply chains recently and gone for more local-based supply chains. Keep that going if you can, where possible. How can we reach out and give an opportunity to somebody who's in distress? Give more something back. So I think it's a massive opportunity. And if anybody wants to reach out to people like Business in the Community or the Prince's Trust, those kind of organisations are doing a lot of creative activity at the moment around engaging business in those kind of topic areas, and are looking for volunteer business to go and help and support them as well. Yeah.
No, brilliant. Another question we've had in, Mike, has come from Neil, who's given the trend to work from home or work flexibly from more local centres like Rochdale and Stockport, as we mentioned. Does Mike think the government should begin to prioritise digital connectivity like 5G and full fibre rather than new transport infrastructure?
Oh gosh.
And a dangerous one, depending how you want to go with it.
So this is not a political response, but I'm on record as saying this for the last 5 years. Both. We need both. And so I thought we should have been doing the full fibre stuff for the last 5 years. Governments keep announcing programmes for full fibre, but it's only still getting to, I think it was about 10%, 12% at the moment, and there's a price in there as well. Realise what fibre could give them. Now they do, having worked at home with two young children in your time, and your bandwidth drops and the jittering happens and the pausing happens. So I think we need a kind of massive upgrade on the full fibre activity across the UK. And again, it was a conversation I was on this morning at 11 o'clock this morning, exactly doing that, about how do we do it for the north and make the kind of northern backbone for the country to make it significantly richer, not just for fibre, but for 5G as well, and because fibre feeds 5G. However, even if we dropped a few percentage points on our travel to work by car or by public transport, our transport mechanisms are still antiquated, still on old-fashioned rolling stock, they still will be packed out. So we need a combination of both digital activity and physical infrastructure as well. This has also shown us, by the way, Chris, that more people want, if we have fewer cars on the road, we can get more cyclists on the road as well. And so that impact of the greener agenda is just amazing. So in my conversation with management, I'm talking about, so think about what's happened in the last few weeks of the things that are really pleasing people, making them happier, like the greener, healthier, wealthier, all those things. What are they? And how then do we purposefully have a plan that allows cycling to continue, allows walking to continue? Don't go building more car parks, because that'll just attract more cars. But we might need wider roads to allow bikes to be on the road safely as well as the cars. Close off some roads. But when you're closing off roads, people often say, yes, but not this one, because I use that one. So it's, I would say we need both physical infrastructure and the digital. And we need it in the north as well as the rest of the country. But yeah, if the government's going to go into their levelling up agenda, then we absolutely need to do something in the north. You know, why would they commit to investment before COVID massively, and then at post-COVID not commit to it? So I think we should hold them to account on that commitment they did back in December at the elections and pre-Christmas, and the follow through so far. And what I'm hearing, Chris, sounds like that's pretty positive, but we need the business community to continue through all the mechanisms to hold the government to account on both those. The thing, by the way, if you think about how much we've just spent on dealing with COVID, actually doing full fibres pales into significance about what we've just paid out for the furloughing scheme and the seedlings, justifiable as they are. But if we're recovering from this, I think we need an investment recovery plan, not a kind of hold back the purse strings recovery plan.
That's a brilliant segue, Mike. I almost think you're watching the questions coming in because we've had a question from John actually on exactly that. So John says initial government support was all about cushioning the impact of lockdown. What sort of measures does Mike think are now required now to stimulate the economy and boost confidence? Anyone would think we'd set these up in terms of what you were saying, Mike, but honestly, these are questions coming in, people. So, and please do keep them coming because we really appreciate it. So, Mike,
brilliant. Okay,
what things are we doing?
So this was predictable in a sense. Anybody who's worked within the public sector or with government for any number of years, like I have, was predictable what would happen. At some point, you knew that the government would privately turn around to places around the country and say, as we come out of lockdown, we want, what's that expression they keep using? Shovel-ready projects. Yeah. That can start stimulating, and they're nearly always infrastructure projects at that moment, that could stimulate an economic revival of some sort, gain confidence for the business community, get more people back into the world of work. So I do know the cities around the country, and it might be the counties as well, but I've only been speaking to a few cities. They have definitely been feeding back to the Prime Minister's office and the one of the government departments, MHCLG, the Communities and Local Government Department, a list of multiple billions of projects that are shovel ready now, ready to go. That these are building projects, and then over a 3-5 year period, you get thousands of people working on these. So they're already happening. So that's the first part. The second part, go back to the digital question. You can't really do that with digital at the moment because it would break the regulations around state aid if the government fed all the money into it. So we have to find a different way of stimulating the market to broadband infrastructure, fibre infrastructure people to go and dig and invest in their fibre. And a couple of things that could happen there is getting local authorities to have a unified planning approach. Sounds very dull, but at the moment, if you go into a Manchester and you go to Tameside and Rochdale and Oldham, you need to apply 3 times for a license to dig those. So can we have and it might be a different form as well. Can we have a unified approach like they have in London? And that would absolutely massively cut down costs. And also a training approach that we need more trained engineers. So how can we get a training approach to stimulate 10, 20,000 more engineers being trained around that kind of area? We also need some access to finance as well. We've had some great government finance helping a majority of businesses go through the process. But as we get furloughing released, there's a big worry that at that point then redundancies might start happening, and we haven't seen it yet in the theatre world. But that's going to be the last to come out of lockdown. You're hearing theatres releasing between 40 and 80% of their employees over the next few months, making redundant. So as we go through, we need some packages of support that will help that youth unemployed facing redundancy. So how do we put packages in place around job guarantees for young people, or around apprenticeships, or around those who are so in Manchester, for example, we're hoping, or we're asking for some money for government that we can those who are newly unemployed, and we've tried this over the last couple of years and it works really well, give them a personalised approach to getting back in the job market as soon as they come out of the job market, if you see what I mean. So don't let them sit on the job unemployment list for 6 months. Hit them really early with a personalised service. And the impact our trials have had over the last couple of years show that actually getting them back into the world of work is much quicker by doing that than the kind of standard ways of doing it. So we need some help in those kind of areas as well. There's a lot of things going on about young people, again, who've need some help because they've missed the GCSE and the A-level stuff. How do we help that generation feel more confident? But I would say the biggest thing for me is, and for like a city of Manchester, is how do we give the investment world out there the confidence that Manchester is now investable again? And that's how we approach the finance markets, but also approach governments as well. So we need to get things moving, but underlying and underpinning all that, Chris, has got to be in a safe and secure way. And already we're doing surveys that show people want to get back to work, but in some cases 50% of some of the surveys, 50% of the people in some of the surveys have said, but we're worried and nervous and therefore we won't go back to work until we know it's absolutely safe. So we need to have a consistent set of safety standards that people can understand and recognise, and that's where employers need to have that messaging for their employees really tight, that it's safe and it's thought through. There's a whole series of things that we have to do as a city region. Sorry, the final one, we need to do this in collaboration with other places as well. We can't do things alone in Manchester without thinking about Cheshire on our border, or Merseyside, or Leeds. So some things we have to do super local, some things at a GM level, some things at a northern level, and some things at a national and international level. But if we get the plans, our experience in Manchester is if we get the plans and the ambitions and the structures and the frameworks, Manchester's been really good over the last 20 years at getting government support for that. And the business backing for some of those things is crucial. I can't stress that enough. The more we get behind all those things and we challenge them and help shape them as well, the easier the sell is into governments to get funding released for a place like Manchester.
Yeah, well, I think that's an interesting question that I think we spoke about before, Mike, when we were planning our talk today. was what's Manchester's role what's Manchester's place going to be post COVID-19, and I think you've kind of built on it there in terms of what we need to be looking at and how Manchester works, because I think all of us who work and live in the city and the wider city region, we all acknowledge Manchester's unique place in the UK, that we don't see ourselves as a competitor to London, but a collaborator and a welcome partner with London. We don't see ourselves as a new capital, but we do see ourselves as a strong independent city in the UK in terms of the Birminghams and Newcastles. We work well collaboratively, but we do feel that we can challenge in terms of a city status across the UK. And then with that, with the airport and with close ties, particularly to China, that we've had in the past few years, the feel of us being a global city, I think, has ever been on the increase. Do you see that continuing post COVID-19, or is it going to be dependent on us making sure we get those measures in place so that it can continue that way?
So the simple answer is our aspiration has to be to maintain or be better than we were before. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, we're going to accept that it's suboptimal at that point. So all those things you mentioned about Manchester being the second most digitally connected city in the UK behind London, the second most invested city in the UK behind London. Our conversation with London, to your point, has always been an and conversation, not an or a but conversation. So we have to be collaborative and want to be with London and any other city as well. But our position in the world is regarded as one that's a kind of city based on foundations of fairness and equality and history, even though we've got a long way to go still in some of those things. And the Black Lives Matter stuff has just shared that more than ever with us before, put a spotlight on everywhere, every place, every institution. So there's more that we have to go and look at. But it's been a place of firsts, whether it's a computer, splitting the atom, or graphene, or transport initiatives. We want to maintain that position. And so our industrial strategy and our local industrial strategy still focuses on those core elements of Greater Manchester. Mm-hmm. However, we're not assuming that everything that happened before will be the same once we come out of COVID, whatever comes out. We're kicking off now another review of our internationalization plans, and because our aspirations for dealing with other countries around the world and ambitions to deal with them might be embellished or changed or enhanced or leveraged. But we can't just assume that everywhere else in the world has the same view of us. So we have to go and, international trade's always built on relationships, and it's transformational rather than transactional. So once we're able to freely move around again, we're identifying at the moment against our plans and our strengths and assets, which countries could we be trading with more closely, both working with government and independently of government. And then we'll go and work with other places around the world. That might be China, it might be Asia, it might be US. We don't know yet. Reviewing that process. And again, all the business groups that we were talking about before, the chambers, the pro management degree in that kind of definitely the ambition's still there. In one sense, why would we have an ambition to be lower or worse than we were before, or slightly lower than we were before? This region's still ambitious and proud.
Absolutely. I think most of us, all of us who live and work here, completely agree. And whatever we are facing in the next few months, I think we all, again, going back to your very first point, Mac, is that like collaboration, us all working together to come through and to be better than what we were. And whether it is whilst we're in this phase of living with COVID-19 and getting through it together, then when we come to building back better, I think everyone is united in terms of that. Just before we round up, we have had a couple more questions or comments come in, so I'm just going to quickly pick these up, Mike, if that's okay. The first one I just want to read out is from Anonymous, who is commenting on our chat earlier, Mike, about commuting and travelling in. They say, I left a job in Media City for exactly the reasons you state. From Liverpool, I had to allow travel for 90 minutes in the morning. However, if I travelled over at, say, 1 PM for the afternoon, it would only take me 40 minutes. can still work from the home office at 8. So I think that's a really good example of it. And I'm hoping, Anonymous, whoever you are, that in this new world of remote working and flexible working, that job may be changing now, and I hope it does. And I hope other people who are in similar positions are now better off because of flexible working.
Fantastic.
One other question, Mike, before we round up, is from David, who wants to go back briefly to the sustainability agenda. He's just asking, building on Dominic's question on how will COVID affect companies' sustainability agenda, will there be any money to take the necessary changes?
Oh gosh, I guess that's a question to be asked and continue to be asked. So in Graham and Andy Burnham, remember, announced that we'd go carbon neutral by 2038 rather than 2050. And so I've been saying with that group for some time, 2038 is a long way away. In one sense, in people's lives, it's a long way away, but it's a short term in the climate world. So I was looking for what's our ambition by 2025, by 2030, and by 2035, because I can grapple with one that's 5 and 10 years out. 18 years, I can't see myself making a difference to some degree. And if we're going to do something that's targeted around 2025, and it might be around electric vehicles, it might be around more cycling, there has to be funding associated with those. But some of that funding could come from the private sector, for which they would get a small return for it. But some of it might come from government. If we don't do it, if we don't see big iconic change agents coming through and ask people then to take small steps on that journey, if we merely ask people to take the small steps, many people will, but many won't. And we need the many to take small steps, as well as the bigger organisations and the governments to take big steps. And some of that, if the one thing this is proven, is that if we went to electric vehicles or more cycle lanes or more walking, more pedestrianisation, people have accepted that over the last few weeks, and the air quality is dramatically improved. So it does prove that, or does lead you to think that this will be acceptable to people, but definitely needs investment for that. But go back to my earlier point of we're spending £1 trillion on going through COVID. We will need an investment route out of COVID to re-stimulate the economy and to make it greener and fairer.
No, absolutely. Last question from the Q&A, Mike. It's John again. Can Mike provide a longer term weather forecast for the rest of the weekend? Do you mind having a quick look to see how far away those dark clouds are approaching Manchester, Mike? How far away are they?
For me, at the moment, they're just coming over the Chester area.
Right.
I can see it's about 15 miles away.
We've got a couple more hours then of the sun before it approaches then.
But for tomorrow, I think I'll predict rain tomorrow at some point.
Yeah, we do live.
On Sunday, I'm hoping it's not, but
yeah, we do live in this region. It's something we do accept.
Live for the moment.
Exactly. So just to round up, Mike, is something we've asked on a number of occasions on our webinars, just to finish off, is obviously bars, restaurants are going to start opening safely from the 4th of July. Where are you going to go for your first post-lockdown pint, gin or tonic, Diet Coke, or tipple of your preference? Where would you go to enjoy your first drink?
So if I'm at home, I'll go to the Dog, which is up in Lower Pever here, just outside Manchester. And take their fish and chips and a pint of Sam Smith's, which is just fantastic in there. Definitely go there because they take dogs as well, so we can take the dog in there, which is just brilliant. If it's in the city, however, do you know, I want to go down to Deansgate, and I actually want to go and get a cup of coffee and people watch. Yeah, I just miss seeing people wandering around. Yeah, and I'd love to go on a bright sunny day, a glass of beer down there or a cup of coffee. Sit on Deansgate and just watch people and smile.
Yeah, that sounds wonderful. And as the sun is beaming through my window, I completely agree. I think excellent. So I was saying earlier to a colleague, because our office in Manchester is in the bottom of the Castlefield opposite Duke's 92, and believe me, on a day like this, there's nothing better than sitting out on that terrace next to the canal.
Yeah.
Very rarely could you social distance when the sun is out, when it's down there, but
or on that piece of grass behind there as well.
Exactly, beautiful spots if the geese let you when they're not at this time of year. But thank you so much for that, Mike. I've really enjoyed that. I think it's been a great session, a great webinar. Please, if anyone who's been watching, or if you're watching on the highlight reel that we have on YouTube now, because you can watch back on Pro Manchester's YouTube channel, please get in touch with us all. If you've got any questions for myself or Mike, please get in touch with the Pro Manchester team and they'll forward those on. Next week, I believe our next webinar is going to be on transport. So I think that's going to be a really interesting one to be looking at, particularly some of the chats we've had today about transports and the changes that we've seen and the changes that we're going to have in the future. So with that, again, I just want to say thank you so much, Mike, for joining me. Really appreciate it as always.
Thanks, Chris.
No problem. Thanks again to Pro Manchester. Thanks again to Virgin Money. And we look forward to seeing you all again at our next webinar. Take care.
Thank you.